The following program is a production of Truth for the World.
Thanks for joining us again on Ask the Expert. I'm Phillip Vanwinkle, and with us on today's show is my good friend Nathan Franson. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Nathan is our expert as we continue to talk about Mormonism. We've had many great shows. We invite you to go back and watch those again and again if you have any Mormon friends. And today's show is really going to help us out in a number of ways. We're going to be asking some questions really to the Mormons, things that as they perhaps come to your door, if I'm understanding right, come to your door, you can ask them to help them to go to heaven, right?
Well, it'll give us a good understanding and hopefully challenge them and
right.
with things to think about.
Well, we said before, we're not trying to condemn a person per se.
Right.
We looked at doctrines already. We've talked about the authenticity or the lack thereof of their sacred books, and we've seen a lot of those things. We really this show want to ask the question: what would I say if a Mormon were to come to my door? What questions could I pose to him that would at least make him think? Because we don't want them to just be off and be lost. We want them to be saved too, but we want to do it in such a way that we don't turn them away straight off, right?
Exactly.
So go ahead and lead us then. What would you say? Since you are I won't say recovering Mormon, but you used to be a Mormon, and so what would you say, having the background that you have, you would ask?
Well, we need to, for those who are not familiar with Mormonism, we need to realize that they are, that most in the Mormon faith are sincere people. Try to put yourself in those shoes. And if you're going up to someone for the first time, engaging them in a conversation and a discussion about a particular subject or a particular faith, and just think about how you would want to be treated, hopefully, and
right.
The discretion that you would use according to that. They want to know the truth. They want to understand the truth. All of us do. And
right.
So what we want to do, as we have mentioned in the past, is to find that common ground with it. The questions that we're going to be looking at today are kind of preliminary questions or early questions before we get into all the doctrinal matters or things that can lead into the doctrinal discussions with that. They're questions asked that if we knew absolutely nothing else about the Mormon faith, and we just we did not know where they came from, we did not know what they believe about certain issues, we could ask based on our first encounter with them.
Now, are these questions mostly, I haven't looked at the questions, I don't know any of what they are, but are they mostly taken from Scripture or just, by Scripture I mean by the Bible, or is it just questions in general that people should know, have common knowledge of, or what?
Not necessarily common knowledge. This is, again, this is for, if you were to engage or have a Mormon missionary or a pair of Mormon missionaries, as it would be, come up to your door and you knew absolutely nothing else about the Mormon faith. These are questions that you could try to engage them just on that first encounter,
okay.
Where you would just first meet them, things that you would notice for the very first time regarding them, and questions that you could use just to kind of set up the discussion, which will hopefully cascade into something much better and much
right.
greater.
A Bible study that they could be interested in and learn from.
Exactly.
Right.
And, these are questions that could equip us to sit down with them,
okay.
Hopefully help them or encourage them to study.
So let's do it then. Let's get in. So they knock on the door, and what?
Okay. Well, first thing we want to know is recognize or kind of be mindful of is the tactics that they're going to be using.
Okay. All right.
They when they send a pair of Mormon missionaries out into the United States or the world, for that matter, one is always going to be more experienced than the other. Okay. You're going to have someone who has been in the field for months. Sometimes they just have another month or two before they leave, and one is going to normally be fresh. Okay. And because they're going to have one kind of leading the other, showing him the ropes and so forth. And that is typically how they will approach you with this.
Okay.
Okay. All we need to do in a discussion, we realize and need to be, we need to realize and acknowledge we're not going to convert someone overnight. We're not going to convert them in one discussion. We're not going to have them going away deciding, giving up everything that they may have been a part of for years. Right. But if we can plant that seed of doubt, that's all we need to do. That's all we're called to preach the gospel. We're called to do everything that we possibly can. And when these men come to our door, there's no need to be afraid of them. I think a lot of people are either turned off or they're intimidated. They may think that the young Mormon men are very educated and will be able to stump them, and they certainly do not want that. For whatever reason, they just kind of turn a cold shoulder to them. Right. They'll slam the door in their face. We need to recognize that when we're fulfilling the Great Commission, when we're doing the work of the kingdom, we go public with it. We
Right.
can't just sit back and be dormant about it. And Christ told us to go into the world to preach the gospel to every creature. What a great opportunity this is to have someone fall in our lap like this.
Right.
We did not just go out into the world. We had someone come to us when they come up to our door.
Well, and I think,
and we can sit down and really use this opportunity
Right.
to present the gospel.
I think a lot of times, and maybe when I was growing up, it might be that one reason that we sometimes will shut the door on the Mormons or we won't give them an opportunity is really we don't know how. We don't know how to talk to them.
Exactly.
And it's not that we don't care about them. Probably most Christians that you talk to say, yeah, I'd love to sit down and talk to a Mormon, but what am I supposed to say?
Exactly.
And so I'm hoping that maybe we can cover some ground with that today.
We'll be able to hopefully open some doors and we get people thinking about this. One of the things you are going to notice that they're going to do is if you present a question to them of which one may not be able to answer, the other one is going to likely step up. And it's probably going to be the one who's been out in the field for quite a while because they've seen a lot more questions, they've dealt with more discussions, more personalities and so forth. And so if you talk to one of them, it's really not going to take very long to see what, who's been out there for a longer time. They may answer a question with a question. If you talk to someone that is not going to be able to answer a biblical question, they're going to try to redirect that conversation.
Okay.
They're coming to you, but they're having the very same intention that we're going to have come, sitting down with them. They want to convert us to Mormonism just as we want to.
So they're going to want to control the situation. They're going to be the ones to want to be in control of the discussion. Is that what you?
They will. I mean, they allow for questions to be asked, and they do want to open the discussion, open the floor for further talking, and that's great. But they will try to redirect questions if you're not press them on it.
Okay.
If one is not able to answer a question before you allow them to move on, press them on it and hold them to the question at hand. Zero in on someone who might be a little bit newer than the other one. Okay, do not allow the other one just to speak up. And if one tries to kind of take control of it, because the other one might not, you can, there's nothing wrong with saying, well, what does he say about it? Well, I want to hear what he says about it.
Right.
And and you can still be courteous in doing something like this. But there are different ways also to make the most out of this study. For one, we want to be polite about it.
Right.
We're going into this with the same thought process as they are. We want to be polite. They want to be polite because they're interested in a Bible study as well. Okay? A lot of people go into this, as you said, just they don't know what to say. And immediately they become defensive. They want to debate them. They want to just kind of jump on top of what they think they know about Mormonism, and they just want to challenge them and try to push them into a corner.
Right.
Well, that's not going to work for anyone.
Right.
No one is going to, for one, listen to that. You probably will not get a second Bible study out of it, and who can blame them? We're looking for a discussion, not just to have an open, debate. Now, there are going to come times when the doctrine does have to come to the surface, and sometimes it might seem harsh, but that's what truth is going to do. Truth tears down error.
Right.
It's not me that's going to be tearing it down. We need to allow the authority of the Bible to do that for us.
Well, I think you make a good point. If somebody's going to offend somebody in this scenario, it needs to be God offending the Mormon, not me.
Right.
And so, because if I offend him, I should maybe apologize. But if God offends him, God's not going to.
Exactly.
And so I think you're right that there's a way that we should handle them, when they come.
There's a way to be polite. Find the common ground. We both want to live by truth. We both want to please God, and that's a great thing about it. We both want a source of reliable information that is going to help us get to heaven with that. And so, other ways that we can do it to really draw out the discussions, as any discussions, is to ask open and closed questions at the right time.
Right.
Closed question is, a yes or no question. You're really not going to get very far with that, and especially on a first or second encounter with them. There, you want to open this up. We want to leave it interesting to the point where we want them to come back so we can keep, talking and discussing and opening the Bible for further study and so forth. An open question, which is, cannot be answered yes or no, is what enables us to open up. And it pushes them to open up.
Right.
It challenges them to study and to find answers for themselves. It prevents arguments. It doesn't, there's a whole number of ways that...
a lot of that's based on just common sense communication.
Exactly.
If you're going to be a good communicator, you don't want to ask yes or no questions all the time.
Right.
You do it in dating or with your spouse or whatever. If you're wanting to have a real communication exchange, yes or no questions is not the way to
Exactly.
Right.
And at the same time, it allows us to see where they're coming from, to see how much they really know. We don't want to just sit there and lecture to people, and to them. Asking questions is really going to be able to, open that door of communications. And so a lot of these questions, some of them are going to be yes and no questions, but some of them we want to try to keep just to, to stimulate thinking and to hopefully challenge them to sit down and study for themselves so they can study themselves into the truth, so they can respond to the gospel, because that's our ultimate goal with them.
So let's go to the door then. Let's go to the door, and now the Mormon is coming. He's knocked on my door, and I say, hey, and he says, hi, I'm somebody from the Mormon church. Okay,
well, they're going to say, I'm Elder so-and-so from the Mormon church, and there's your first one right there. The very first thing that we see, other than, seeing these young men with black ties and dark suits, or with white shirts riding around on bicycles, is you're going to see their name tags. That's what they are known for. People who are not religious at all know who the missionaries are when they see them riding their bikes. Well, that name tag is the very first place you can go with that. Knowing absolutely nothing else about them, we can go to that name tag and hopefully challenge them with something right there. Elder so-and-so. Okay? In the Bible, we see in 1 Timothy chapter 3, we see the qualifications of what an elder is.
Right.
They call it a bishop. A bishop comes from the Greek word episkopos, which is an elder, and is the office of an elder. It is an authoritative position. There are certain qualifications that need to be met with it. Now, a young Mormon missionary is going to know absolutely nothing about what the qualifications of it. They haven't been told. They have not been taught what this is. And so our first question could be, just seeing them, the very first glance at them, the very first meeting with them, why are your young missionaries, and you can direct it at them as well. Why are you or your young missionaries referred to as elders? When we have in Titus chapter 1 and verse number 6, if any be blameless, this is referring to the qualifications of an elder, the husband of one wife. We can ask them right there. Are you married?
So who's your wife?
Exactly. Having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. They may meet some of those qualifications, and certainly they probably will. They're not going to be guilty of being a riotous or unruly, but they need to meet all of the qualifications with Scripture. Who at 19 years old, which is kind of the typical age of being on a Mormon mission, is going to be married at that age, much less have faithful children.
Right. Right, and faithful meaning they're faithful to that Mormon, I guess, at that point, the Mormon faith.
Yes.
Right.
In 1 Timothy 3:2, bishop or episcopos must then be blameless, the husband of one wife. It's reiterated with this. Vigilant, sober, of good behavior, and so on. And so we can ask them, are you married? If not, why do you consider yourself an elder? And do you fit these scriptural qualifications?
Okay, and so probably, I mean, what might he say?
Most of them are going to tell you that it's just a title. It's given to them in the Bible. We can talk, we can take them over to where the Bible talks about titles and how we should not have titles.
Right.
And that's a reasonable place to take them.
Right.
But they are probably, they may not know. They may say, well, I'd like to study this. I may go back and do this. But the bottom line, the qualification is what it is.
Okay.
And we can...
So question number one, when they come to the door, the very first thing is you can capitalize on the name tag that they're wearing and say, okay, so you're Elder John Smith. And so, Mr. John Smith, where's your wife and your faithful children?
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
And so there's one question that we can kind of open it up. We don't need to be mean about it,
right?
But press them on it. Ask them why. And if it is just a title, ask them why they're taking a title, or where we see the qualifications, a biblical qualification that is authorized by God, that they do not fit.
Right.
Do you really want to take upon yourself? Put yourself in a position that is not authorized by God, especially if you want to please God. You're doing something completely that would disqualify you from that. And another question we could ask is something similar to this. Now, remember in the last episode, I was talking about me being a deacon at the age of 12.
Uh-huh.
Okay. We see the qualifications of deacons also in the Bible. We can ask them, why do you install deacons at 12 years old? Okay, the qualifications of deacons, we see in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12, let the deacons be the husband of one wife. What 12-year-old do you know that has a husband of one wife, ruling their children? So this implies they have children. Why, what 12-year-old is going to have children and ruling their own houses well? And you can ask them straight out, do your children at age 12 have children and rule their own homes?
Right. And they're not going to be, you think, they're not going to be offended by these as much as they might be, they might not have any answer for it. Is that what you're saying?
They may not have any answer. They may try to skip around the answer, but if you press them on it, you may get as far as, having them say that they'll go off and study it and get back to you. Right. Okay, our objective is to try to, challenge them with this thinking, but at the same time try to get them to come back. We want the answers for this. We want to make sure that they fit everything biblically speaking, not what I say, but what, how do they fit the Bible? With this, are these, and so we can, ask them with these children. Another question that we can ask them.
Go for it.
And this is a big one. Would you follow a doctrine which contradicts the Bible? Now, we certainly know what Paul wrote to the Galatians concerning that, the consequences if anyone disputes that. Would you follow a doctrine which contradicts the Bible? Okay? Well, if you wouldn't, well, why not? And if so, why would you use it if it contradicts the Bible?
Right.
Why would you, for one thing, why would you trust it?
Right.
If it contradicts, why use something that contradicts a book, or why use the Bible if it contradicts something, anything any other source that you have? So
if I ask a Mormon this question here, would you follow a doctrine which contradicts the Bible? It's almost a lead-in question, it seems like, because I don't know what your next question is, but in my mind, the next question is, then, would you follow a doctrine which contradicts the Bible? Well, I'm guessing they would probably say no. I mean, that would be my guess. But I may be wrong in that. But if they said no, I would then need to be prepared to show where the Bible contradicts Mormon teaching.
Right. Well, that's going to come. Yeah, that's going to come later, and we're going to, what we need to do is hold them to that.
Okay.
Because they're saying, if not, why not? And ask them, and and that's great,
So,
because they're going to give us an answer that, that the Bible is the authority. They're going to understand.
So we
that.
actually want a yes or no answer on this question. We're not looking for an open-ended question as much with this question.
Exactly. And
Okay.
if they say no, ask why they, would not do it.
Right.
And then, let's hold that aside then, because we want to come back to that and remember it, especially later on when we're going to be dealing with doctrines that obviously are contradictory. Right. Yes. Okay. So this one sort of is sort of similar to the last question. Does the Bible contain everything to be added to the Lord's church? You touched on this in one of our past episodes. And does it contain all that is needed to remain faithful? Well, if the Bible contains everything to be added to the Lord's church, why do we need the Book of Mormon?
Right.
If we do not need the Book of Mormon essentially to go to heaven, Bible contains everything, as as everyone's going to have a copy of the Bible.
Right.
Well, why would we need anything else then?
Right. If it contains less than the Bible, it's not enough.
Exactly.
If it contains more than the Bible, it's too much.
It's
right?
too much. If I never heard of the Book of Mormon, and this kind of goes along a similar one, could I still go to heaven? Well, if not, then what is the point of proxy baptism? If I had never heard, if I could not go to heaven, if I'd never heard of the Book of Mormon, then what's the point of you being baptized for me after I'm dead? If I have no chance, if I hadn't ever heard of the Book of Mormon, I can't get to heaven.
Right.
Then I'm never going to get to heaven.
Okay, so that's actually
why would I even need it?
That's actually very good question. If you already know about proxy baptism, because now they're going to be stuck in the horns of a dilemma. They're going to have to answer this question, because it's, if you can go to heaven, never hearing of the Book of Mormon, you don't need it.
Well, why do you need it?
Right. Okay, very good.
Here's a big one. Then this has to deal with, again, the 8th article of faith, which states that we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it is translated correctly. We also believe the Book of Mormon to be. Well, if the Bible is not translated correctly, then, where is it not translated correctly? They have the responsibility to show me, okay, where, and if it's not translated correctly regarding salvation, why would you even use it? Why would you trust it? Right. If it's not correct in salvation? Why would you use a book you do not trust? Your responsibility to me, by telling me that the Bible is not translated correctly in certain areas, which they have done,
right.
when,
he needs to tell me where.
You need to tell me where. Right. Your job is to get me to heaven. The same job as that I have is to preach you the truth, to try to get you to heaven.
Right.
And so, if I'm wrong on anything, I need to know it.
Right. And that's important. That's an important point on both parts, and that is, you and I, when we go to talk to someone, we don't need to just make allegations like this. If I were to say, well, the Bible isn't translated correctly, or if I were to say to a Mormon, it's not translated correctly, but I don't have anything to support it, right. I don't need to say it in the first place.
How successful would our Bible studies be if we went door knocking or sat down with someone to discuss it with them,
right.
and they called something out that might be a Bible discrepancy, if there was one, yeah. regarding salvation, and for me to say, well, that's just not translated correctly.
Right.
How far, we would not get very far at all. They wouldn't trust it, and I wouldn't blame them for not trusting it.
Right.
Well, they come back and they say it's not translated correctly in certain things. Well, where?
Okay.
The burden of proof lies on you with that.
All
and
right.
why would you not use, why would you use that book in the first place if it's not?
Right.
All right, this is the one that comes from what Brigham Young stated before, if man is as God once was. This is pertaining to the celestial kingdom and being able to,
right.
To acquire the celestial kingdom. If man is as God once was, then who was God's God? Well, we can take this back as far as we want to go. What is eternity if there was a beginning? If God was created, who was the first God? This is actually similar to one of the things that kind of led me out of Mormonism.
Okay.
One of the things, of which when I studied myself out. In the Mormon sacrament, which is their version of communion, and it takes place every Sunday morning. They actually use bread and water and not fruit of the vine and unleavened bread. But they have a prayer that is said. The very opening line, the very first line of this prayer is, "O God, the eternal Father." And I started thinking about that one day and thinking, and reading in other passages, I am the Alpha and the Omega, I am, I always have been, I always will be. And thinking, well, if God is eternal, then how in the world can he be as man, how could he have been as man is?
Right.
And if God, and what is eternity? If there was a beginning at some point, it's hard to fathom because we live in in a finite timeline. Right. We live in, from this point to this point. Well, God has always existed and always will exist. We can't even fathom eternity right now. But if God was created, well, who was his God?
Right.
And who was his God?
That's a very good question. Now, I'm going to have to stop you because we're almost out of time. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer this question. If a Mormon is watching this show, why should he stop being a Mormon, and why should he become a member of the Church of Christ? 30 seconds.
Well, first we want to look at the positive aspect of that. Why be a member of the Church of Christ? We want to, we know that Christ established one church, and we see that in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost. It was the only church. It was not a denominational church. We do not see the Mormon church on that day of Pentecost of which he established. He told Peter, on this day I'm going to build my church. It fulfilled prophecy. We see Joel's prophecy fulfilled. One church that Christ established. How do I become a member of that church? And by being a member of that church, it automatically excludes the Mormon church, the Catholic church, any of these denominations and religious organizations.
Right.
I want to be a member of that church and see what I need to do to be added to it.
And so that's really the basis of why you would want to be a member of the Church of Christ, because it is the only way to salvation.
And it is not the Mormon church that
right. Well, thank you, Nathan, for being part of this. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed this study on Mormonism.
If you would like to learn more about God's Word with a free Bible correspondence course, then write us at Truth for the World, P.O. Box 5048, Duluth, Georgia, 30096, the United States of America, or visit us online at TFTW.org. The preceding program was a production of Truth for the World, a work of the Duluth Church of Christ.